Have you ever looked at someone in a super high-stress job and wondered, how do they do it? What is it that makes some people seem to thrive under pressure, while others just crumble? Well, today we're going to dig into a concept that might just be the key.
This is the core question, right? When you put people in these intense, high-stakes environments, think about the military, for example. The stress is just off the charts. And yet, you see completely different outcomes. So what's the one thing that makes the difference? And to get a sense of just how intense this pressure is, get a load of this number. A recent study found that between 2005 and 2019, insomnia diagnoses in the U.S. military went up by a factor of 45.3. No, that's not a typo. It didn't go up 45%. It multiplied by over 45 times. That's a staggering amount of sleepless nights, and it makes finding an answer to our question even more critical.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, the research we're looking at today points to this fascinating idea called psychological hardiness. So let's unpack what that actually is.
So what is it? You can think of hardiness like a psychological shield. But it's not some magic wall that just blocks all stress, because that's impossible. Instead, it's more like a set of internal tools that lets you handle that stress, to process it, so it doesn't end up causing real physical or mental harm.
And this whole idea of hardiness really rests on three main pillars. They're often called the 3 C's. First, you've got commitment. That's having a real sense of purpose, a deep belief that what you're doing matters. Then there's control. This is the belief that you're not just a victim of circumstance, that you can actually influence what happens. And finally, maybe the most important C, challenge. This is the mindset that sees a tough situation not as something to be afraid of, but as an opportunity to learn and grow. These three things together, that's the recipe for hardiness.
So, commitment, control, challenge, it all sounds great in theory, right? But does it actually work in the real world? Well, to figure that out, researchers decided to test it against the U.S. Army's own framework for health, which breaks everything down into 5 key areas.
And this framework is so important because it gets that health isn't just one thing. It's not just about being physically fit or mentally okay. It's this whole interconnected system of mental, physical, sleep, nutritional, and even spiritual health. So the real question became, does hardiness protect you across all of these domains?
And when it came to mental health, the results were, well, they were pretty staggering. Just look at this chart for PTSD symptoms. On the left, you've got people with low hardiness, and the reported symptoms are way up there. But then look to the right. For people with high hardiness, the symptoms are dramatically lower. And it wasn't just for PTSD. The research showed the exact same pattern for things like depression and anxiety.
Now this slide is really interesting. What it tells us is where all the research has been focused. Out of 48 studies they looked at, a whopping 41 of them were on mental health. So yeah, we know a lot about that connection, but it also shines a huge spotlight on where the blind spots are. We know way less about how hardiness affects these other critical parts of our health.
But here's the thing, even with the limited research, the trend seems to point in the same direction. The handful of studies that did look into these other areas found the same kind of positive links. Higher hardiness meant fewer sleep problems, a stronger sense of spiritual well-being, and even healthier eating habits when things got stressful. The signal is definitely there, even if the data is a little thin.
So, okay, we're seeing these connections pretty much everywhere we look. But why? What's actually happening under the hood? How does having this hardy personality translate into better health? Is it automatic, or is there something else going on?
And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because if it's an active process, that means it's something we might actually be able to influence. And the answer, it turns out, really comes down to how we cope with stress. When we're hit with a stressor, we basically have 2 paths. We can use what's called adaptive coping, face the problem, look for solutions, manage our emotions, or we can use avoidance coping, where we try to ignore it, push it away, or withdraw, which, as the research shows, often leads to much bigger problems down the road.
And there it is. That's the secret sauce. This quote from the research lays it all out. Hardiness isn't some passive shield that just magically works. It's a mindset that actively promotes a better way of coping. It pushes people to face their problems instead of running from them. That is the engine that connects this personality trait to better health.
So if hardiness works by making us better copers, what does that mean for the future? For anyone in a high-stress job, What are the real-world implications of figuring this out? All right, let's just quickly recap the big takeaways here. 1. Hardiness is a huge predictor of better health. 2. It works like a buffer, protecting people from the worst effects of stress. 3. The secret is that it fuels a better, more proactive coping style. And 4, we've seen that there are big gaps in the research, especially when it comes to sleep, nutrition, and spiritual health. But that brings us to the most exciting part of all.
So here's where it gets truly game-changing. It turns out hardiness might not be something you're just born with. The research points to a pilot study from 2023 that found you can actually train for it. They showed that hardiness-focused training was totally feasible for military personnel. This means it might not just be a trait, it might be a skill that can be learned. And that leaves us with this one kind of mind-blowing thought to end on. If we can actually train people in these 3 C's, in commitment, control, and a challenge mindset, could we be on the verge of psychologically inoculating them against the worst effects of stress? I mean, think about that. It's a powerful idea, and one that this research suggests is absolutely worth going after.